Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of In-Silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty cool. It's real-world data in healthcare and how all this data that's collected outside of clinical trials, is really changing the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it for a second, like your Fitbit or, your medical records, your insurance claims, all of that stuff that, we think of as just like everyday stuff is actually contributing to, all these new discoveries and breakthroughs in medicine.
It's really amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a completely different perspective than what we get from, these really tightly controlled trials. We're really talking about, real world experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The nitty-gritty, everyday sort of realities of how people are interacting with the healthcare system.
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty then. So first of all, what exactly are we talking about when we say real-world data or RWD?
So the FDA actually has a pretty straightforward definition. They define RWD as data about health and healthcare delivery. Really important part here is it's collected routinely.
Okay.
And it's not from like a specific experiment. So think about it this way. It's not a controlled trial where you have very specific parameters and you're looking at a very specific outcome.
Right.
This is like a much broader view of what's happening in the real world.
Yeah.
With healthcare.
So that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I also imagine that because it's not from, those really pristine trials.
Exactly.
Like this kind of data must be pretty messy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges with RWD.
Okay.
By its nature, it's observational.
Mm-hmm.
So, it can be incomplete. There can be errors. Think about it like, a database where there's like missing entries or typos.
Right.
And, everyone's recording information maybe a little bit differently.
And it's coming from all these different sources.
Exactly.
Right. It's not all standardized.
Yeah. It's a real mixed bag.
So I imagine researchers must have to spend a lot of time just kind of cleaning and preparing this data.
Yeah. It's a massive undertaking.
Okay.
I mean, there are researchers who are completely dedicated to just figuring out how to make this data usable for research.
So that's fascinating to me because,
Sure.
I mean, just the sheer volume of it alone must be overwhelming.
Right.
But before we get into like the methods and how they actually work with this data, can we talk about the different types of RWD?
Sure.
I mean, what are we actually talking about when we say, real world data? What are some examples?
Okay, so let's start with something probably everyone's familiar with, electronic health records.
Okay.
Or EHRs. So these are basically digital versions of your medical charts. They track everything from, medications and lab results to your blood pressure readings and diagnoses.
Mm.
It's an incredible resource for personalized medicine because it gives us this really granular view of your individual history.
It makes me think about privacy, too.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, having all that information about your health digitized like that, raises concerns about who has access to that data and how it's being used.
You're right to be cautious. Data privacy is a huge priority.
Mm-hmm.
And researchers are very aware of the need to protect this sensitive information.
Okay, so that's EHRs. But what about other types of data? I know you mentioned, this idea of registry data.
Yeah, so registries are really interesting because they're specifically designed to collect data about patients with certain conditions.
Okay.
So, for example, you might have a registry for people with a specific type of cancer.
Right.
Or a rare disease. This is particularly valuable because it gives us insights that traditional trials might miss.
Well, that's what I find so interesting about rare diseases.
Yeah.
Because often there's just not enough people, with those conditions to conduct these large-scale studies.
Exactly.
So how do registries help bridge that gap?
Think of a registry like a collaborative database where healthcare professionals from all over the world can pool their observations about a specific condition.
Okay, so they're all sharing information
Exactly.
about, what they're seeing with their patients.
Right. And this shared knowledge helps us understand how the disease progresses, identify potential treatment options, and even design more effective clinical trials.
Okay, I see. So it's like creating this global network of information about these really rare conditions.
Exactly.
That's pretty incredible.
Like powerful stuff.
So we've talked about EHRs and registries.
Yeah.
What about something like claims data? I know that's used to track healthcare costs, but what else can we learn from that?
Claims data is a goldmine for understanding healthcare utilization in the real world. It can show us patterns in how people are seeking care, what treatments they're receiving,
right,
and how those treatments are impacting their health.
Okay, so it's like we're seeing the whole patient journey through their interactions with the healthcare system.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual patients. We can use this data to look at larger trends too.
Oh, okay.
Like healthcare costs.
Right.
And identify areas where we can improve efficiency and affordability.
It's amazing to think that something as mundane as billing records can actually provide so much insight into healthcare.
It's a treasure trove of information.
Okay, so we've got EHRs, we've got registries, we've got claims data. I feel like we have to talk about wearables, though.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, these fitness trackers and smartwatches that are tracking everything we do these days.
It's incredible
Yeah.
how much data they're generating. I mean, we're talking about continuous monitoring of things like heart rate, sleep patterns, physical activity,
right,
even blood oxygen levels in some cases.
Wow.
This is revolutionizing fields like neuroscience.
Okay.
And environmental health.
Yeah.
Because it gives us this real-time view of how our bodies are responding to different things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wearing a fitness tracker right now.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, it's a little bit creepy.
It can be.
How much it knows about me.
Yeah.
But I also see the potential for it to be really helpful.
Absolutely.
In terms of personalizing healthcare. Imagine your doctor getting an alert.
Yeah.
If your heart rate suddenly spikes or something changes in your sleep patterns before you even notice any symptoms.
That's the exciting thing about wearables. It's pushing us towards a more proactive approach to healthcare, where we're intervening earlier and potentially preventing serious health issues.
Okay, so we've got all this data now. What do we do with it?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And in the next part of our deep dive,
okay,
we're going to delve into how researchers are actually analyzing this real-world data.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that.
Because it's not as simple as just throwing it all into a spreadsheet.
Right, I figured.
Yeah, there are specific techniques and methods that they use to deal with the messiness and extract meaningful insights from this data.
So we've been talking about all this real-world data, all these different types and sources.
Yeah.
And it's clear that there's a ton of potential there.
Absolutely.
But I keep coming back to this idea of how messy it all is.
Right.
You've got data coming from all these different places. And it's not always complete or accurate.
Yeah, that's a huge hurdle.
So I'm really curious, how do researchers actually go about cleaning up this data?
It's a multi-step process.
Okay.
And it involves a lot of different techniques. I mean, first they have to identify and correct any errors.
Okay.
Things like typos, missing information.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to standardize the data.
What does that mean exactly, standardize the data?
So it means making sure that everything's formatted in the same way.
Okay.
So that you can actually compare apples to apples.
Makes sense.
So, for example, you might have one hospital that's recording blood pressure in millimeters of mercury.
Okay.
And another hospital that's recording it in kilopascals. Huh. So you had to convert everything to the same units.
I see.
And that's just one small example. There's a lot of different things that have to be standardized.
So it's like taking this raw data and kind of polishing it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Until it's ready to be used for research.
A lot of work.
Okay, so you've got this clean data now.
Right.
What happens next? How do they actually analyze it?
Well, a lot of times researchers are using machine learning algorithms to analyze this data.
Okay.
Because they're really good at handling large volumes of complex information.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I've also heard about this black box problem with machine learning.
Yeah, so the black box problem is basically...
It sounds a little scary.
It can be. I mean, it's this idea that with a lot of these algorithms, we don't really understand how they're making their predictions.
Okay.
So we can put in all this data and the algorithm will spit out an answer, but we don't necessarily know why it came to that conclusion.
And that seems like a problem, especially in healthcare.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to be using these algorithms to make decisions about people's health,
Right.
we need to be able to trust them.
So what are researchers doing to address this black box problem?
Well, one approach is to try to make these algorithms more transparent.
Okay.
So they're developing techniques to sort of visualize the decision-making process
Okay.
and highlight the key factors that are driving the algorithm's predictions.
So it's like giving us a peek inside the black box.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that can help us understand why the algorithm is making certain decisions.
But transparency is only part of it, right? I mean, what about reproducibility?
Yes. Reproducibility is a huge issue in all of science.
Mm-hmm.
And it's especially challenging with real-world data because every data set is unique.
Okay.
So what might work with one data set might not work with another.
So how do researchers ensure that their findings are actually reliable?
So one thing they're doing is emphasizing really meticulous documentation.
Okay.
So they're making sure that they're recording all the steps that they took.
So other researchers can follow along,
Exactly.
replicate this study.
Right.
Wow.
They're also making their data and code available to other researchers.
So it's like open source research?
Exactly.
I like that.
It's becoming more and more common.
But of course, with all this talk about sharing data,
Yeah,
we have to talk about privacy,
absolutely.
right? I mean, this is sensitive information about
Right.
people's health.
So there are a lot of different safeguards in place to protect privacy.
Okay, like what?
So one thing is de-identification, which is basically removing any personal identifiers from the data.
Okay.
So things like names and addresses.
Mm-hmm.
They also use encryption, which scrambles the data
Okay.
so that it's unreadable without a decryption key.
So it's like putting a lock on the data.
Exactly.
Hi.
And then there are even more advanced techniques like differential privacy.
What's that?
So differential privacy is a way of adding a little bit of statistical noise
Mm-hmm.
to the data
Okay.
so that it's harder to identify individuals,
Mhm.
but you can still see the overall trends and patterns.
So it's like blurring the lines a little bit
Yeah.
while still keeping the picture intact.
Exactly.
That's pretty clever.
It's really cool.
Okay, so it sounds like there are a lot of ways to protect privacy while still using this data for research.
It's the constant balancing act.
But even with all these safeguards in place,
Mhm.
aren't there still concerns about bias?
Oh, absolutely. Bias is a huge concern
yeah.
because if the data itself is biased,
Right.
then the algorithms that we build on that data are going to be biased too.
But we could end up perpetuating existing health disparities.
Exactly. And that's something that researchers are very aware of.
So how do we avoid that?
Well, one thing is to be really careful about the data that we're using to train these algorithms.
Okay.
We need to make sure that it's representative of the population that we're studying.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be aware of any potential biases in the data itself.
And I imagine there's also a lot of work being done on developing algorithms that are specifically designed to be fair.
Absolutely. The field of algorithmic fairness is really exploding right now
Okay.
because people are recognizing that it's not enough to just have good data.
Right.
We also need to have good algorithms.
that are fair and unbiased.
Exactly.
So it's like this whole new layer of complexity.
It is.
But it sounds like it's essential if we want to make sure that this data is actually used to benefit everyone.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway here.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this part,
We have.
and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear about what the future holds for this field.
Yeah, in the next part.
Okay,
We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the future of real-world data in healthcare.
so we've talked about the challenges of real-world data, how to clean it, how to analyze it. But you know what I'm really excited about? It's the possibilities.
Oh, yeah, me too. I mean, this field is just exploding with potential.
Like, where do you see this all going? You know, how is this going to change healthcare in the future?
I think one of the biggest areas where we're going to see a huge impact is personalized medicine.
Okay.
Using all this data to develop treatments that are tailored to each individual patient.
I mean, that's the dream, right?
It is, and it's becoming more and more of a reality thanks to RWD.
So how does that actually work? Like, how do you go from all this data to personalized treatments?
Well, researchers are using all this data to identify patterns
Okay.
and develop algorithms that can predict how individual patients are going to respond to different treatments.
So instead of just having like a one-size-fits-all approach to medicine,
Right.
We can actually start to tailor treatments based on a person's unique genetic makeup, their lifestyle, their medical history.
All of that.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
And it's not just about treatment, right? I mean, I imagine this data can also be used for disease prevention.
Absolutely. I mean, by analyzing all this data about lifestyle factors, environmental exposures, genetic predispositions, we can identify people who are at higher risk for developing certain conditions. And then we can intervene early, potentially preventing those diseases from developing in the first place.
It's like having this personalized early warning system for your health.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
And what about rare diseases? I mean, we talked about how registry data can be helpful.
Yeah.
But are there other ways that RWD is contributing to finding treatments for those conditions?
Definitely. I mean, RWD is a game changer for rare disease research.
Okay.
Because it allows researchers to combine data from all these different sources, patient registries, EHRs, even social media sometimes.
Wow.
And by pooling all this data together, they can get a much deeper understanding of these really rare conditions.
And hopefully that leads to new treatments.
Exactly.
It's like we're crowdsourcing research for rare diseases now. And that makes me think about the role that patients themselves can play in all of this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're all generating tons of data through our smartphones, our wearables, our online activity. Could that data be used to improve healthcare?
Absolutely. Patient-generated health data is incredibly valuable.
Okay.
I mean, think about all the things that people are already tracking.
Right.
Symptoms, medication adherence, physical activity, sleep patterns, all of that provides insights into their individual health journeys.
But I imagine there are some privacy concerns there.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, people might not be comfortable sharing all that personal information.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable.
So how do we make sure that people feel comfortable sharing their data for research?
I think transparency is key.
Okay.
People need to know how their data is going to be used, who's going to have access to it,
right,
and what steps are being taken to protect their privacy.
So it's about giving them control over their data.
Exactly.
And making sure that they understand how it's being used.
Right.
This is all so exciting. It feels like we're on the verge of this whole new era in healthcare.
It does.
But are there any potential downsides, like anything we should be worried about?
Well, one concern is the potential for bias and discrimination.
Okay.
If the algorithms that we're using to analyze this data are trained on biased data, they could end up perpetuating existing health disparities.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
So we need to be extremely vigilant about data quality, representation, algorithmic fairness.
Right.
We want to make sure that RWD benefits everyone equally.
And I guess the other thing is just making sure that we don't become too reliant on data and algorithm.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, these are powerful tools, but they should complement human judgment, not replace it.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still about doctors and patients working together to make the best decisions.
Absolutely. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And I think it's clear that RWD is going to continue to play a bigger and bigger role in healthcare in the years to come.
Oh, definitely.
But before we wrap up, I want to turn the conversation over to our listeners.
Okay.
We've talked about a lot of different aspects of RWD, but we want to know what you think.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
So if your wearable data could contribute to finding a cure for a rare disease, would you share it?
Would you?
What privacy concerns would you have?
Yeah.
How do you envision RWD shaping your own healthcare journey in the future? We encourage you to keep diving deep.
Yeah.
Stay curious and engage in thoughtful discussions about the role of real-world data in healthcare.
Absolutely.
After all, it's a topic that affects us all. Until next time, keep exploring.